All right, guys, it's time for the Next Level Guy Show, a men's interview, interest, and improvement-focused podcast featuring interviews with the greats from all industries to help you better your life. Each week, a new episode features an interview with one of the greats, covering all aspects of their story, from life hacks to tips and protocols that have allowed them to live life on the next level. We then highlight concrete action steps that you can use to improve your life. And now, your host, Ian Dawson McKay.
You don't need to justify your existence with utility. Beauty is enough. And that's a quote from today's guest, Eva Schubert. But what if the key to a meaningful life isn't success, but it's reinvention? In this episode, jazz singer and creator Eva Schubert reveals how she's rewritten her own story again and again to live a life with passion, presence and purpose, and writing her own soundtrack for life. Meet today's guest, Eva Schubert. She's a jazz singer, a podcast host, a historian, and a modern-day storyteller. Eva defies labels. She's the voice behind soul-stirring jazz albums and the creator of the Villains and Virgins podcast, where history and myth collide. Whether it's through music, conversation, or reinvention, Eva shows us how to live a life of art, intellect, and unapologetic joy. She's a college instructor and the creator of the Villains and Virgins podcast on all things historical. She's also a songwriter with 4 albums to her credit and a self-confessed fitness fanatic. Whether it's from making history come alive on her podcast or stirring passion within you from her stunning music, she needs to be on your list of people to follow. And now, let's get to the interview. Thank you so much for coming on. It's an absolute joy. Now, we were discussing just before we started about how much I love vibing out to your songs. I follow your podcast. Now, I've written you a wee introduction. What do you think about too many people live life on autopilot, following the script they've been handed instead of writing their own? But Eva, she's proof that reinvention isn't just possible, it's essential. A jazz singer, writer, historian, and an entrepreneur, Eva refuses to be put in a box. She's carved her own path, embracing creativity, curiosity, and bold risks along the way. Today, we're diving into what it really means to forge your own identity, challenge the status quo, and live with passion. Eva, welcome to the show. Would you agree with that? Or how would you define yourself?
Wow. Well, thank you, Ian, for that introduction. It sounds very inspiring. I
wanted to stand up and salute.
Right. I would agree with all of those principles, and I do my best to live up to them. How about that?
So, what would you define yourself as? Are you if you come up, would you say initially you're a singer? Would you say a historian? Would you say a podcaster? Would you say a creative person? How would you kind of encompass all the amazing facets that combine to create you?
You know, it's funny because which sort of hat I put on when I'm meeting somebody for the first time depends on who they are. And it also sometimes results in some very funny games. I remember, because all of these things are who I am. But if someone is meeting me for the first time, the question is, what piece do I put at the front, right? And there was this one very memorable episode where I was wearing my singer hat. I was interviewing this gentleman because I had need of someone who could dance on camera. And it was very difficult to find such a person who is also tall enough, because I'm quite a tall woman. And when I have my shoes on, it's worse, right? So you don't want to be having a wild mismatch in heights on camera. It just doesn't look very good. So anyway, I found what I thought was a suitable candidate, but I thought it would better have an interview in person before, agreeing to have him on the project. And so all he knew about me was that I was a singer and I had this music video project. So we sat down and we had a chat, and we got just sort of carried away in this wonderful conversation about diasporas and civilizational influences and cultural borrowing and whatnot. And he said to me, "You're actually quite smart." And
That's nice.
and what was hilarious about this for me is that I've spent most of my professional life in academia. I teach at a college, and so that's normally the first thing people know about me. So they assume a certain level of education and intelligence. And it was quite surprising and hilarious to me to realize that this gentleman, looking at exactly the same person, knew only one thing about me, which is that I did music, and assumed therefore that I was some sort of a ditz and not really very intelligent, and was surprised to discover that this wasn't the case. So I've learned that depending on what part of the truth I present people with, they make a very different set of assumptions, and sometimes it amuses me to play with that a little bit.
Well, it's like attracts like, doesn't it? You know, you find your tribe, but as you kind of switch personas, and it's interesting how people don't know the different parts of you, even though they've known you for years. And I always find that really weird when people say to you, "Oh, I didn't realize you were into podcasting." And you're like, "What do you think? I just went to work and did X, you know?" And it's like people who know you as a singer suddenly go, "What do you mean you're not doing this full time?" Or that vice versa with you and work. It must be strange for students to hear. I mean, you've got an amazing vocal range. I mean, you've had people saying that you were like was it Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, you know, all these amazing people you're getting comparisons to. And then I know you through your podcast. And
Yes.
you find that there's so much depth, there's so much scope to you, that there's so many areas to go into. You're almost a nightmare guest because there's so many different things to ask about and try to conceal it into 1 hour. But can you remember that first moment when you were younger when you thought, I want to be creative, I want to create rather than consume media and do things?
Yes. I think there was, I mean, I started writing poetry before I hit puberty. But put it that way, I was a very bookish child, and was fascinated by words and the music that language could make. And I strictly mean language. I had no conception that I had any musical ability whatsoever, actually. But I was fascinated by meter and rhyme and images and the effect that poetry could have on the mind. And I was trying to manipulate that. I thought that was very, very interesting. So that goes back a long way. There was also somewhere in the back of my head some sort of waking dream that involved being a jazz lounge singer. It was a very Jessica Rabbit kind of vision, and I don't know where it came from, but it was sort of persistently in the back of my head, and I ignored it because I'm the oldest of 8 children, and we came from a single income family. Obviously, because someone had to be home with all those children, so money was tight, and I grew up with a strong sense of, I need to be practical. I need to do sensible things. I need to become financially self-sustaining. I need to go to university so that I can improve my life. And creativity wasn't really part of this serious plan. Creativity was something I sort of did on the side, and I didn't really talk about much. And I was very focused on getting my degree and then getting another degree. And, I moved to the UK for a bit to do my second degree. I was all in on the academic plan. And it wasn't until one fine day when I was stirring a pot of oatmeal, of all things.
As
And
you do.
yes, I was in the morning stirring this. And I had written some lyrics because I've loved jazz again since I was a little girl. My grandfather was a big jazz guy. He used to play the vinyl records of Sinatra and Dean Martin and all these guys.
Good
So I
choice.
love that. I love those vibes and just the feeling and the romance in the lyrics and the swing and all that. But while I liked to listen to it, I was convinced I didn't have a musical bone in my body. So I was writing these lyrics and I was thinking to myself, perhaps one day I'll meet somebody who does have musical ability and then we can put these things together. And I don't really know how that's going to happen. So I'd written these lyrics, stirring the oatmeal, going over the lyrics in my mind. And suddenly I could hear music behind them. And I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, I need to find some way to record this. Otherwise, I know it's going to vanish. I'll get distracted by something in 10 minutes, and whatever I can hear in the back of my mind right now, it's going to be gone. Like a dream when you wake up, like half an hour later, you don't remember anything about it.
Like try to catch water.
Exactly. So I'm frantically looking for free recording software on my phone, and I'm sort of humming this thing into the phone just so I can get it down somewhere. And from that morning onwards, it was like a tap had been turned on in my brain. And very frequently, when I would be writing lines, I could hear music. And then the music would sometimes come first, and I would write the lines after. And so suddenly there was this flood of melodies that would be coming into my brain. And at first I was in disbelief, and I was like, this is probably somebody else's melody that I'm remembering. It's probably a song that's stuck in my head somewhere. This can't be me. And I would always worry about that, but I would record these things. And in a few months, I had quite a collection of songs with lyrics and melody. But I hadn't done a lot of musical training. I mean, I had a couple of very basic, piano lessons when I was a kid, and I could find, some notes on the piano, but that was it. I sang in the choir at church a little bit, when I was a child, and that was the extent of it. So I didn't have the vocabulary to write the melodies down or to arrange. I could just write lyrics, and I could find the tune and the pacing, and I could think about what instruments should be there. But in terms of writing out parts or anything, forget it. So that's how it started. And I just had this realization that there were capacities I was totally unaware of until this moment in my life. And I was 30 when this happened. I mean, I finished my university years, and I was working and I was doing other things. And so the question was then, well, what am I going to do with this? And I realized that I was going to have to get serious about singing, because if these were songs I wanted to share with people, I had better be good enough to deliver them myself. And so it kind of started that way.
I love that. It because everybody assumes we're either born with it or we're screwed. But you kind of felt that voice speaking to you, that internal voice. Because I think that's a lot of times it's, if the people who succeed are the ones who listen to it and don't stop, they just keep going back and back through it. Can you think about that first time that you went out and started performing, even if it was to like a friend or family members? How did you start dealing with that level of that fear that bubbles in you? That when suddenly you're the product, you're going to be evaluated by people watching.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Do you ever get over it?
Yes, but I say terrifying, even though I was a person who, at this point in my life, had years of experience public speaking and being in front of a room. I mean, I was already working in higher education. I was in front of classrooms of young adults every week teaching. I had given public lectures to large audiences. It wasn't as though I was someone who was uncomfortable with being the focus of attention in a room. But it's very different when you're coming with facts and arguments and a curriculum and a lesson that people have sort of already agreed to come and listen to, but that they know what it is and they want to be there. Yep. Versus saying to people, this is something I've made out of nothing, and I'm offering it to you. And it's deeply personal in a way that teaching people how to do something or teaching people about something is not.
So subjective versus objective. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there aren't sort of the clearly established lines of what's good and what isn't. you just produce it and you put it out, and you don't know what people are going to think, and they might absolutely hate it. And so it's very personal in a way that my other types of public speaking and interactions were not. And I remember just my heart rate, spiking, and the nerves being so intense that even like your voice almost feels like it's shaking as you're trying to sing. And so the first time I did this was just in front of a couple of really close friends. But the first time I had a public performance of it, oh, the nerves were just intense. But I remember reminding myself of something I tell my students all the time, which is that a good public speaker, it's not about how you feel in terms of whether you're afraid or not. It's about what you telegraph to the audience. And so there are ways that you tell your audience with your body language that you're afraid. And you don't need to tell them that you're afraid on the outside. So you could be having an out-of-body experience and having your stomach on a roller coaster on the inside. But if you're deliberate about the messages that you're sending with your body language on the outside, it doesn't have to be obvious to your audience how frightened you are. And so I reminded myself of these principles for my first public performance, and I sort of pulled myself up in front of the microphone, and I gave myself the open body language, and I, made eye contact with people in the room, and I started, and I was terrified, and I was so glad when it was over. But people came up and said, "Was this your first performance? That's unbelievable. No way." And I was like, "Oh, I'm so glad that's over." And so the truth of these messages that I'd conveyed to students who were terrified of public speaking was also true and valuable for me when I was the one sort of in the beginner's seat again as a musician performer.
Because it reminded me when you were talking just now about that feeling I used to get when I would do podcasts, and if somebody cancelled last minute, the relief I would have, not to go out there. But I had that version of myself fighting the child version of myself that was saying, like the devil and the angel, one saying, "Go on, do it. You can put this out as good," and another saying, "Whoa, back off. You'll be made fun of it." And it's whichever one you listen to into it. Do you find there's a way that you can step into it? Like, is it you just sell the story that you're smart, sexy, successful, that you already own the stage, so the people buy into the story, they read the story that you're portraying, even if you're shitting bricks, as the Scots would say?
Yes, there has to be a kind of a strong sense of self-affirmation. Like you almost have to talk yourself up on the inside before you go do it. So last spring, I was touring in Italy in April, and this it's a crazy thing because I had to set this all up myself. And I had multiple performances from sort of Rome and north of Rome all the way down to Matera in the south. And I had the privilege of playing with some absolutely wonderful musicians in some really classy jazz clubs. And you have that same struggle with those two voices inside of you. The one which says, "You're an imposter. You're going to show up here and everyone's going to realize that you're an amateur who doesn't really know what you're doing next to all these real musicians. And what are you doing here? You don't belong." And then there's the voice that says, "Actually, I just arranged a tour in Italy for myself because I can do this, because people have listened to this stuff and they want me to come here. They know who I am. I'm not selling something that is not true. I am the person whose voice is on these records. I haven't been auto-tuned. Like, this is me. And so I just have to bring me. They already know who I am, and this is the person they want to see." So you have to remind yourself of that. And it doesn't go away. I've had to deal with this even as recently as a couple of weeks ago. But you have to make a conscious decision of reminding yourself that every time this, what I call the voice of weakness or the voice of doubt, crops up, it's a voice that prevents you from doing things. And when you listen to the other voice, wonderful things happen. And so you have to remind yourself, yes, here we are in this decision again, Listen to the voice that has led to opened doors and waking dreams and wonderful experiences, and ignore this other one, which wants to make you quiet and small and afraid. And so I think the more times you're in that position, the longer a record you have of, oh, I recognize this, the easier it gets in
Wow.
some ways. But it's not easy.
Oh no, I know that feeling, that journey you go through each time. It just going, are you sure? Are you sure? And
Yeah.
you when you have to see the version of yourself that you know it's the successful one or doing the well, and it's hard not to slip back into old ways, but it can come super strong. I can't believe that you set these up yourself, because they look so professional. They look such well produced stage shows, and they look like, there's thousands of people working on these things. They look phenomenal, your videos. And I love how you were saying there before we started, like, about how your music has like hidden jokes and meanings and stuff, and especially if you read some of your lyrics, that are amazing. But how do you think music, like, what would you say your musical inspiration is? How would you define your style? Because I had to write this down. Where is it? Sizzling trumpet, strutting guitar, and rhythmic bass grooves combine for a jazz experience that swings and soars. That was a review of one of your albums. What do you think? How would you define your music? Do you think music's a universal language that speaks to us all? That's why it's so popular.
I think that music is a kind of magic. I like to think of it as something like a spell if it's done right. And I say that because you could be having a terrible day, or you could be in one mental state which seems like the final statement about the world and what is in it. And if you put on the right music, it will change the color of the wallpaper inside your mind, and it will change the way the world looks and feels to you.
Love that.
And it costs you nothing. It's a flick of a button, but if you know which sort of bottle or which vial to open, you can have a totally different experience of reality. And I think that that's very powerful and very potent. And it has many forms. I mean, there are the happy, bright songs that we just put them on and they just make us feel instantly more cheerful. There are the songs that get embedded in our experiences and our memories. And when we open those vials, they take us back to people and places and pieces of ourselves that we haven't seen for a while. And so they're redolent. They've taken on a significance that's deeply embedded in our lives. And then there are songs that explain ourselves to ourselves. I mean, Heartbreak is a classic example of this. When you're feeling this pain and it seems unique to you and unbearable and horrible, and then you listen to the right song, and if the lyrics are perfect, you suddenly hear your story there, and you hear someone else telling it, and you realize that it's an experience that can be understood and can be passed through. It lightens your burden. And so I think that music is very powerful. It has the ability to inspire us. It has the ability to alleviate pain. It has the ability to take us down memory lane. And I think that it even has the ability to help us formulate hopes and plans for the future. So it's a very powerful thing. I don't take it lightly. And not all music is like that. There's some pop music that really has like 3 or 4 words in it and just and you know, that's just to make you gyrate on a dance floor. That is the function of that. It's for that purpose.
Yeah.
And so it's legitimate. But when I'm speaking about these things, I'm thinking of music that has a wider range of effects on us.
Do you think it's a sort of version of it tells a story through a song? And this is going to sound this is probably going to go a bit OTT. It sounded good in my head. Do you think that by doing that, you scratched a creative itch, and then by the world travel, it started igniting more of a passion into your history to then combine the two and start telling the story of our history on the podcast?
Well, it's actually the podcast evolved separately for a very different set of reasons. So my passion for history also goes back to my early teens. I mean, I was a nerdy child who was reading everything I could find about Henry VIII and the Tudor court at age 12, 13, and 14. Um, at the age of 12, there was a library book sale, and we used to go to the library every week. My mother would take all the children, and we each had our own book bag. We would go to the library, we'd load up with books, we'd take them away for the week. We'd come back the following week on the same day, return the books, and get new ones. So it was a very regular thing for me. And sometimes the library had book sales where they were getting rid of books they didn't want on the shelves anymore, and they'd sell them off for 25 cents, 75 cents, $1, things like that. So I remember, I think I was 12 or 13, and I was going through my Tudor phase, and there was this massive book about Cardinal Wolsey, Henry VIII's right-hand man, who failed to broker the divorce with Catherine. And so I knew who Cardinal Wolsey was, and this was a biography of Cardinal Wolsey written by some Oxford Don, and it was, I kid you not, more than 1,000 pages long, okay? It was massive. And I thought, oh, great, it's about Cardinal Wolsey. I'll just get this book. I paid my 50 cents for it, took it home. And was wading through these chapters about the agrarian reforms that Cardinal Wolsey instituted in England and in the 1500s. And as a 12-year-old, I was really uninspired by agrarian reforms. And honestly, I think I still would be uninspired by that. So it became quite burdensome. But I learned a couple of things. One, that Ibid was a very prolific scholar. He's cited on every page. I don't know who this Ibid is, but he's obviously some Greek scholar I hadn't heard of. No, Ibid is academic shorthand, meaning see the previous citation. This is the same source. But yeah. I just saw Ibid and I'm like, who is this guy? I need to look him up. So what I'm trying to say is I've been a history nerd for a very long time. And my first degree is in history, actually. But
I like how you said your first degree. A lot of people are sitting there just now going, "She's got what? More than one?" I don't think people understand like how you get up to like PhD and beyond.
So I loved it, and even when I finished that degree, I mean, I'd been reading history before that degree. That's why I did that degree. I continued to read history after that degree. And there were historical questions that I was fascinated with personally, that I was always reading up to know more about and making notes on. So it's been an ongoing thing forever. And during COVID, the podcast came up as an idea basically to keep myself sane, because I suddenly, as everyone else did, found myself stuck at home and really starved for sort of stimulation. And the podcast was a way of focusing my brain on something that I could absorb my attention in and craft a narrative about and communicate with people. And so it started at that time. And, it was sort of an informal hobby-like thing for the first few years. And, it's become more serious since.
No, I mean, it's exploded, and it is such an exciting podcast. I mean, but history is large, obviously. We've got like the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, you've got like the Spanish Inquisition, you've got just the UK historical, the amount of wars and bullshit that went on back, you could like Dan Jones and these kind of like shows, they can do whole series on just the Placetarians and stuff, and I think that's something we struggle with, is try to understand our own history, because if you can see where you came from, you can understand where you're going and maneuver to have a better future. How do you pick the areas you look at to inspire your reader? Do you scratch a creative itch and focus on things you're not teaching, or is it things that you think are great stories that will inspire the reader?
Yeah, it's a mix of those things. It's stories that I find fascinating, And it's stories that I think fill gaps in our understanding. So things I think are not well covered or misunderstood. So, for example, one of the early series I did was on the Great Schism. And this was because I realized the Great Schism is this moment where the Christian world splits forever into an Eastern half and a Western half. And you and I have grown up in the Western half, the Latin half. And we've so forgotten about this that many people I was running into didn't even realize there was an Eastern half. And, the Eastern half is called the Orthodox Christian world. And it has subdivided into things like Greek Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, Ukrainian Orthodox, and so on. They're all Orthodox Eastern Christians. But there was a time when the Christian world was one, and then we have this moment where it divided, and it's very much been disconnected ever since. And so this series was inspired by my own experience of, I knew what had happened because I've done my reading and I'm really interested in religious history just personally. But I was running into people that, had no idea that Orthodox Christians were Christians. And I was sort of going, wow, I mean, this is a pretty serious gap. This is a really serious forgetting. And I think that a lot of people didn't really know much about it or had forgotten what it was or how it happened or why it mattered. And I think it's not just an arcane piece of the past. It's highly relevant for how we understand ourselves and other people around the world who share deep traditions in common with us, but we've forgotten about that. And so I did that series to address what I thought was a really undercovered area. For example, it depends.
It's time for a quick break. There are millions of potential products to buy, so how do you know which ones are worth your hard-earned money? Simple. You go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and explore those that will transform and improve your life. You'll find deals, listener exclusives, and special offers with some great companies. Recommendations are 100% honest and only on items Ian has tried or believes in. The companies showcased will make you a better man in all areas of your life. Simply go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and level up.
I mean, that's what I love about your show. Is like I consider myself like a major history fan. I'm quite buff on some things, and so very very poor on others, shall we say? And I find that even stuff I know about, I was listening to show, and there's things I was picking up, going, "Didn't know that. That's amazing. No, I need to find out about that." Like it inspired me. But even just for somebody who's coming new to it, you take people on such a journey, an exciting journey, and you explain things in very exciting but very like layman terms that bring it alive. You can make it full of emotion, and you tell the story from a way like, but almost like a song. Do you think you used your musical abilities to make the podcast play like a song rather than just a history lesson?
I think there's a very deliberate focus on the human experience that I try to use as the guiding principle for the podcast. Because for people to care, they have to see themselves in that moment to really understand it. And so you have to be able to put your listener in that moment and understand what's motivating these people here to act the way they do, and how do they understand the world? How does it look to them? What are they afraid of? What are the forces that are shaping their lives and the things that constrain their actions? And when you do that, people can step into those shoes and they can get a sense of what the world looked like from there. And so in that sense, you're right that good music also is transmitting an emotional experience from the musician to the audience. The language or the tools that we use are different, but the goal is the same. If I write a song that's just really particular and specific to me, then it's like a journal entry. It's not going to speak to people. But
Yeah.
if I can take the elements of my experience and I can communicate them in a way that others can see themselves in it, now that is something that has that quality that we're aiming for. So you're quite accurate actually in pointing out that parallel, and I hadn't thought of it that way. But yes, that is the goal. It's just a very different set of tools that we use to do that.
Because that's something I was kind of intrigued about, was that you've talked about art on some of your like your reels and stuff, but I was also interested about your take on like the music of the time and how it portrayed and how it demonstrated the cultural understanding and the beliefs of the time period. But I mean, for people who are very like, because sadly it's, you don't really see many people historically interested as much nowadays. They're all too busy in likes and Snapchat and all that kind of crap. But they're missing out on such amazing stories about who we are and why we are the way we are. Who are good sort of entry points, or who are good, like, if you were just getting into this time period, or you want somebody to be interested in history, would be great role models, or start here and then work back, or start, I know it's a massive timeline you've got to work with, but are there people that jump out that you think are great, like you need to check this guy out or learn his story or their story or her story?
I mean, it depends sort of what a person is after. So I did a one-off podcast about the Battle of Britain, where the Blitz, where the Nazis are bombing London.
Mm.
And I did that story because it's a moment of desperation, and it's a moment of determination that I think we've forgotten about. When we talk about World War II in schools, we have the Allies and we have the Axis, and the Allies were these countries and they won, and then the Axis is over here, and we have the Holocaust, and we sort of have these big sort of teaching points, which is fine and it's necessary. But what we miss is that the outcome of that war was not known to the people who were living through it day by day. And the
No.
choices that people had to make in the face of fear and destruction, to persist and not to surrender, that's a human thing. And so the story of the Blitz on London, it's called Operation Pied Piper on the podcast. It's a fascinating story because parents in London were making the decision to put their children on trains and send them out into the countryside because they were pretty convinced that the chances of fatality were high for those children to stay with their parents in London. And so trying to imagine for a moment yourself, I mean, I don't know if you're a parent, but surely you know people who are, to say, these are my children, that they're the humans that I'm most responsible for, that I care most for in the world. And I'm going to put them on a train and I'm going to send them into the care of strangers. But I am going to stay here in London because we have a war to fight and we're not surrendering. These are decisions that everyday people made, that families made. We're not talking about soldiers at the front who had their own massive sacrifices to make. These were everyday people who are waking up in bombed out parts of the city, who are listening to buildings collapse into rubble at night and finding their neighbors dead the next morning, and living under this for months. And of course, there's political pressure to say, let's find a solution. Let's make a deal with Hitler. I mean, France is already out of the game. Britain is fighting alone. We can't possibly survive this. How many more British people need to die? Let's just make a deal with Hitler. There would have been massive political pressure for this. And yet, they said no. And so the courage to say no under those conditions requires a level of conviction and belief in something worth fighting for that I wonder if people in these countries have right now. And I have the sense that remembering these moments gives us a sense of who we are and what the sacrifices were that were made so that we could remain as we are. And that raises the question of, well, what are the decisions we have to make? I mean, there's a direct line. If we don't know anything about this, and we just sort of know that history is a bunch of battles that were won and things that happened, we don't see ourselves as players, right? We see heads of state and sort of armies and accords, and that's it. But the truth is that the outcome of these things very much depends on the ordinary man or woman and decisions that they make individually and collectively. And when we understand that, we understand our present differently.
I love that. I love the way you look at it, because it's true. I mean, how many people just now would not be able to explain who Churchill was or what he did? They could give you some bargain basement about Love Island and all this kind of nonsense TV. But it's when you learn about, I mean, I like learning about the Clan Mackay history to see how the Scottish people adapted, what happened with the Highland clearances, and how that's changed the landscape in America, and with as just absorb it going anywhere we can get a drink, basically. There's so many things that we do when you look at our history, but something that comes across in a lot of things is, did you notice how much history is changed by the arrogance of people, by the lack of understanding, by the just the general stupidity almost? If you look at like Magna Carta, the provisions of Oxford, just for like our kind of like the sort of the UK, you start seeing it's because of the arrogance of kings, which caused this to come out, which is something that we celebrate today. Do you see that nowadays, that a lot of who we are and how our societies are run are thinking because somebody couldn't keep it in their pants, somebody was too arrogant, somebody believed they were better than they truly were, that it's almost like because they were punished, we've got the society we have today?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually see this a bunch of times, whether you're looking at the French Revolution, whether you're looking at Magna Carta, whether you're looking at English overreach in the American colonies. I mean, there are all these sort of systems that are set up for extraction and for domination, and the people in charge of them feel very secure in maintaining these systems which benefit those in control of them and subject everyone else, until such time as somebody decides we've had enough. And then there's this massive sort of reaction. And we looked at this with the Peasants' War. I did a 2-episode series on the Peasants' War in Germany, and it was the largest peasants' rebellion in Europe prior to the French Revolution. It was massive. Hundreds of thousands of people coordinated in a resistance to being serfs, to being, basically slaves on the land in what is now modern Germany, and rose up against the noblemen and the princes of the church, who were also nobles, but you could be like a bishop in charge of a monastery which owned a plot of land, and it had serfs on it that were required to provide labor for that land. And it was incredible. And it's hardly ever covered. But this was a massive movement of people who said, enough. Our conditions are unjust. We've endured and endured and endured and endured. It's never enough for you people. You keep tightening the restrictions on us and imposing yet more taxes and rules and things. And you had a massive armed rebellion. It was incredible. And it's not really talked about very much. But the fact is that systems that make the powerful comfortable stay in place until they can't, because people make it impossible for them to stay in place. And that can happen through concerted civil action. Sometimes there's violence, sometimes there isn't, but there has to be a massive coordinated effort. That's what changes things. So again, while these lessons we can look at as test cases in history, the fundamental underlying principles haven't changed. And so when we look at our own situation, if you say, well, I don't like this or I don't like that, it's not enough to sit back and say, oh, well, our systems are run by powerful people and there's nothing we can do about it. Well, if you know your history, you know that we've been here before and we've seen worse. And there are, in fact, things that people can do about it. And it's people doing things about it that cause it to change. It's not going to change on its own.
No, that's a great point. And that's what I think the problem is. We're now so far away from understanding our history or seeing, or like, where we've come from. People are forgetting the blood, the sweat, the tears, the effort it took to get us to this point. I mean, something that comes across big in a lot of history is the story of women. They went from being men's objects almost to being political pawns to get, two nations to unite with weddings if they were a princess, to then fighting for the vote and then finally getting the vote and now being in charge of countries and in power and stuff. But when you look back to that, they were a witch if they had a better crop than some people, if somebody accused them. There's all these amazingly stupid things. And now I seen when Trump was it the first or the second one, I can't remember, and some of his supporters were saying, "No, my husband will vote for us. He dictates what the family do." And I was thinking, do you not understand there was women who had to throw themselves under horses to try to get the vote. The suffragette movement fought for so many years. So many people died because to give you the vote, and they were just going to give it away. And I think that's the terrifying thing about it. And I really like the idea of, because your podcast is called Villains and Virgins, that I was thinking, great if we could do some shows just on the importance of women and how everywhere you see these amazing things happening, there's always an amazing woman there. Even if she's behind the scenes, like Henry Tudor's wife, mother even. There's always amazing women who prop up these despots, nutters that we all hear about, like Henry VIII and all that. How do you see the role of women now in it? How have you seen it evolved over the podcast you're doing, and the importance, especially to women and young girls, of saying, you're like Boudica, Cleopatra, all these like amazing people, but we look at Kardashians and go, that's what you should aspire to. How do we inspire women today?
This is a wonderful question. And it's something I think about a lot, because the stories we remember and the stories we forget shape our ideas about what's possible for us. And so the erasure of women from history, the ignore. I mean, you've named some very important high-level women: Cleopatra, Boudica, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Absolutely. If I asked the average person on the street about them, Cleopatra would ring a bell because she's been Hollywoodized. We all saw Liz Taylor do, Cleopatra with the eye paint. But she would crop up as a sex symbol. But she was so much more than that. She was a very savvy political operator who survived multiple assassination attempts, who had to fight for power in her own family, who had to try and navigate a path for Egypt, which the Romans wanted to dominate and control. She was a very, very, she spoke multiple languages. She was incredibly well educated. She was a very smart woman and a very brave woman in terms of daring to make decisions that had high costs attached to failing in the effort to secure something for her family, for her country. So what's interesting about that is that when we look at the Kardashians and we look at the Liz Taylor version of Cleopatra, it reduces women to one thing, which is basically sex objects. And the message that sends to young girls today is that this is your mission and this is your purpose, and you fail to the extent to which you're not a sex object. It's such a partial and incomplete and not even fully human version of anything. And it sort of reduces women to focusing on the superficial, let me worry about my nails and my lashes and my clothes. And it almost encourages them to become a caricature of themselves, you know, to focus on this superficial looks-based thing, and also to be constantly worried and in fear that if my looks aren't as good as that airbrushed AI-generated image of something over there online, I'm failing and I'm not good enough. When we totally fail to recognize with the stories that we tell and remember the very important roles that women have played that were related to things far more important than their sex appeal. I mean, sex appeal is a great thing to have. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not suggesting that people wear sackcloth and cut their hair off so that they can endure sex appeal. But I'm saying there's so much more that matters than that, and I don't think that girls get this message. I know there's a lot of talk about girl power and so on, which it kind of nauseates me because it's content free. It's just mantras and slogans that get chanted, girl power, hee hee. And I'm like, well, how about we actually have some examples of women doing useful things instead of just, chanting these infantilized slogans, because they don't mean anything and they don't inspire. It's not an object lesson in something that was accomplished. It's just something that, you hear on these sort of programs or videos. So I think that remembering these stories is critical. And as you point out, I mean, it has real world effects. If you see women in the States, some of them are willing to sort of hand off their votes. It's because they have no understanding of the cost that was paid to get that and the existence that women endured before they had such a thing. They just don't understand any of that. And so to them, it seems like not a big deal. Oh, I don't really need to vote anyway. I mean, I have the same opinion as my husband right now. So, whatever. Whereas if you understand that women were essentially chattel, like cattle to be traded, bought and sold, beaten, had no rights under the law whatsoever. And you see the incredible struggle that was fought for them to become persons under the law with rights as citizens by themselves, not as an extension of some man's identity or property. If you knew that, you wouldn't be casually handing it away. But it's because we've forgotten these things that people make choices that are manifestly not in their interest. So it's not a kind of an academic subject. I think it's a vital subject for understanding who we are and the choices that we face right now.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I mean, that's what scares me, is that my little niece is growing up and that's the kind of crap that she'll see, rather than be told about how, like, is it Margaret? I can't remember her surname, the Henry Tudor's mother, where she was married at 12. She had her first kid that almost killed her. She was widowed at 19. She kept herself alive by amazing intrigue through the different kings and wars, and eventually helped create the Tudor dynasty. And when you see how long she lived, and she outlived king after king, and we then only know about the guy because it was male dominated all the way through. And I think that's sometimes what we need to explain to people, not just women, but people of different cultures, to say, this is where you've come from. This is why the Scots are maybe like the hardy bastards that we are, because of the hardship we have to endure. This is why these kind of people have the arrogance. These kind of people, because it's how we understand the culture because of where we've come from. But is there anything that's really surprised you as you've come along? I mean, I listened to some of your shows, and people think witches, for example. None of them would believe that they were male witches. No one would believe that they tortured heretics because they believed that it was actually good for their souls. Things like that. You're kind of like, what the fuck? You learn so much from your podcast, but has there been something that's really kind of blown you away or changed your perspective on something by your research into it?
A bunch of things. I mean, speaking of torture and heretics, the Spanish Inquisition is something that was widely misunderstood, including by myself, until I started doing the reading on this. Because we kind of think, oh yes, the Spanish Inquisition, so lots of torture and arrest and witch burning. Well, they were burning people, but not witches. In fact, the Spanish Inquisition was extremely skeptical and dubious about the concept of witches. that was something that was going on in in Protestant areas in Europe. So the witch burning, which we associate with superstition and hatred, which it was, wasn't a Spanish Inquisition problem. Now, they had their own problems. They were worried about, and this really surprised me, they were really worried about Jewish converts, or, sort of crypto Jews in Spain. And so I didn't realize until I dug into it, the Spanish Inquisition was very much focused on minorities more than heretical Catholics. It wasn't really about a Catholic who had a wrong theological belief, although those people would be caught up. But it was much more about people who appeared to be Catholics, but were perhaps actually Jewish or Muslim, and who had converted because pressure had been brought to bear on these minorities that if you don't convert or leave, you're going to lose your property or your life or whatever. And so there were these people who were converting because there was political pressure, and then the people exerting the pressure were rightly concerned that, well, I'm not sure these are conversions of conviction. I think these might be conversions of convenience. Well, yes, maybe under the circumstances you have reason to believe that. Maybe you should stop creating these convictions.
What gave it away? It's like when they used to drown them, and it was like if you swam, you were then taken away, and you were punished by being able to swim. And it's like, but if you drowned, you were Christian. It's just like, but it's like bloody hell, like when you hear some of the stuff. I mean, it was like when a king was publishing books about how, like King James, about how they were witches and they were devil, and you were like, what hope has somebody who's got no teachings when somebody who was given the best of the teachings of the time believed tripe, basically, that. And I know that we've given these people, sort of posthumously clearance. Oh, I can't speak today. That we've realized that we've given them pardons, and we've made them, and we've taught people about just the ignorance and the misunderstanding of how the danger that it can cause in society. I think it is scary. Do you think that the misunderstanding even now of how people will use Twitter as a source, they'll use a .com as a source, whereas in a college or university, you would not accept anything even remotely close to that that's not being peer reviewed, or could you explain, so I can finally put this out and say, how on earth do we gauge a historical fact? Because people will say, such and such said that on a website that's true. How can we get people to actually see this truthfully?
I have this conversation with my students every semester because I have a whole section on reliable sources, and I give them guidelines for evaluating sources online. And we talk about peer-reviewed sources, and I explain to them that I have a whole section on this where I say to them, it's not just about keeping your professor happy. This is not just something we do in university because we have these strange rules about academic sources. I was like, this is something that every one of us is responsible for every day. Because when we're online and we're irresponsibly sharing things that are not accurate, we're actually contributing to what is called familiarity bias. And this is something that propagandists like Goebbels knew a long time ago. And it's very simply this: the more frequently you hear something, the more truthful it sounds, no matter how outrageous the claim. So the first time that you heard that there was no such thing as a moon landing and it was all staged, you think, oh, how absurd, what a lunatic idea. But by the time you've heard it 50 times, because people are sharing this and sending it and posting it all over the internet, it begins to sound kind of credible, like, oh, maybe that could have happened. I mean, and it's strictly because you've heard it repeated enough times. And we've seen this happen so many times. I think it's dramatically accelerated in the last 5 years. And it's one of the major crises of our age. I mean, and the most ridiculous example of this that I give to students is I say, we're in 2025, and people are using cell phones that are powered by satellites circulating around the planet, sending signals. And using these devices, they assert that the world is flat like a pancake. Now, going back to something that smart guys in the high Middle Ages didn't believe. I mean, I just finished an episode on the Normans in Sicily, and they had a cartography project led by a Muslim by the name of Muhammad al-Idrisi in like 1140s, who believes that the world is round, and he's actually estimated the circumference to within 1,000 kilometers of the actual diameter of it. So this guy back then knew more about the world than people right now with their high-tech digital devices. And so it's ironic and it's tragic, because on the one hand, we have access to more information at a fingertip than we've ever had before in human history, but it's so mixed up with absolute nonsense and rubbish that people are flooded with this stream, and it's got everything in it. And they're really having trouble distinguishing between what in here is information and what is misleading, misreported, or outright false, and downright crazy in some cases. And the inability to distinguish fact from fiction in this torrent of content that is coming at us all the time is leading to some really terrifying consequences. I mean, we've seen this anti-science, the growth of an actual animosity towards science, specifically in medicine, since COVID, when you had conspiracies going around saying, oh my God, you know, all of the nations of the world, all the governments of the world, and every public health expert you've ever heard are collaborating in a massive lie about this pandemic, which isn't actually happening. It's a hoax that they're perpetrating on you for some nefarious purpose. But here I am in this YouTube video telling you the truth. But never mind all those people. Every one of them are lying, and they're cooperating in a way that's hitherto unprecedented.
These hundreds of thousands of people are all going to keep the same secret.
Yes. I mean, it just beggars the imagination. But there's this other thing, which is confirmation bias, which is that people are far more likely to accept and agree with things that confirm their existing beliefs. And so if you already come from a community where you sort of think there are, you know, global conspiracies, or if you've already been exposed to the idea that everyone is lying to you, this is just an extension of that same premise. And the problem is that once you admit this one premise, that all the authorities you know are lying to you, then everything you know about reality is up for grabs. You actually know nothing at that point, and you're wide open for the most bizarre and outlandish claims, because having eliminated all recognized sources of information as trustworthy, and having agreed to accept only this podcast host or this YouTuber or this politician as your source of information, anything is possible. And it's tempting for people, because I think there's an overwhelm. I think people are overwhelmed, and it's hard work to pay attention and to say, you know, what is the website that's publishing this source? What is the organization behind it? Who is the author of this source? What are their credentials? Are they involved or invested in some way in the matter which they are reporting on? You know, these things all can you cross-check this information with other sources that are known to be reliable? Do they confirm? Or is this source the only one that makes this claim? You know, these are basic tools that all of us should be using, but it's amazing to me how absent they are from most people's decision-making calculus. And I think that people are overwhelmed, and so they revert to tribalism. They just say, this guy is from my party, or this guy makes the right sort of catchwords that identify him as a member of my tribe. Therefore, whatever he says, I'm just going to accept. And you come from the other tribe, because I think you've used some of the wrong words. And so whatever you say, I'm not going to listen to. And it just simplifies everything for you. But the cost of that simplification is the truth.
No, it's amazingly put, because you see that, don't you? It's like, oh, this is my source, and it turns out it just so happens to be the guy that believes the exact same thing as them. You know, the echo
Yes.
chamber. And both sides are guilty of it. I mean, I'm sure I do that myself, but I try to at least go and see, does the condescending guy have a point? Does the person who has just called me a cunt and in the discussion, I'll at least sit and go, have they got a point? Is there validity into this? And then I'll go and look for sources that prove one way or the other. And I think if more people did that, we would probably be a lot happier as a society, and probably wouldn't have the division that we have in gaps. I mean, look at the world just now. We're going tariff crazy, and we're changing this, we're doing that. Probably just dated this podcast, but and it's people who are sitting there who don't understand something. Oh, it's a conspiracy. Oh no, it's a government-made thing in China. You think after coming out of that and after seeing what smallpox did with vaccines, how we changed the world back then. But we're seeing science adapt in real time. Of course, there's going to be mistakes, but it came out and it saved the world. Yeah, people are going to have little bumps here and there, but it does. I don't believe for a second it's killing hundreds of thousands and it's some big thing to plague us and put. What was it? Something about Putin changing our DNA. That was the beauty I heard, that a vaccine was changing our DNA. And a friend that I worked with at the university said that to me, and I was like, "Get out!" Just And it just bugs me that smart people can fall for that. But it's like you said, open the door a wee bit, it gets in, a bit more smoke gets in, and before you know it, you don't have the confidence anymore. So you can fall for any stupidity.
Yes.
Oh, I think we could put the world to right. And that's why I love that your show's there, because you're putting this stuff out, but you're also explaining it from the sources. You're explaining it from the mother tongue, from the people who written from you're quoting sources. You're not just saying, well, this is my opinion. You're actually explaining it from various sources and teaching people about it. And if they're open-minded, there's a lot to learn. How do you juggle that? You're singing, you're teaching, you're doing all these amazing things. How do you like outside nature, fitness?
Yeah.
You do a lot of that stuff. But how do you juggle all that? And how do you get time to emotionally, physically, mentally recharge for life?
Big question. Well, there's a massive amount of reading, first of all, that goes into any podcast that I do. I mean, typically I go to the library and I come back with a stack of books, and I also go and I get some journal articles, which I download, from journals online, and I'm going through these things and I'm making notes and I'm starting to construct like the timeline of what happened, and then I have to get deeper and I have to get, because questions emerge as I'm getting to grips with who the players are and what they're doing. Then I want to know, well, why, and what sort of person was this, and why would they do that, and so then I've got to look now for specific answers to these questions that are emerging, and so there's more looking and more reading, and I do try to include quotes from primary sources wherever I can, because it gives people a flavor of what people closer to those events are saying and how they're seeing it, and how it looks to them, how they're writing it down. And sometimes even discussing that, this source is known to be very, very negative towards this king. Like this source was consistently said only the worst things about this king. And to put that into context and say, we don't just do history by opening one source and reading off the page and saying, this is the fact. I mean, historians have to juggle different sources of information, and they have to weigh them off against each other and try to figure out, what is the reliable account of these facts that we can extract from all these different things. It's not easy. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. With regard to my own work-life balance, it's hard. I feel sort of like there's always a task list that I'm behind on, really. Working out is something that, yeah, but there have to be things that are not negotiable. So for me, fitness is one of those things that I view as kind of a foundational part of my identity and functionality. And so that means that happens every week on a schedule without fail, unless I'm sick. So there's heavy lifting 4 times a week, and then there's cardio and tango dancing, because in the past 2 years I've become a tango addict. So that's a thing. Um, so so those things happen on a very regular basis. Now, sometimes when I'm deep in a project, I can't spare 6 hours to go up a mountain. Um, I'm going to be doing more of that in the summer as the weather is better and the hours are longer. There's more daylight, which kind of gives you a buffer for getting yourself on and off those areas. But I kind of cycle some of those things. So the fitness is not negotiable, but how it's expressed sometimes varies. There are times when I'll be doing, longer runs and less hiking, or vice versa. The singing is something that I've had to sort of put on hold for the last couple of months, just because getting to grips with doing what it takes to bring the podcast to the next level means that I have to allocate more time to it than I had before. And there's a fixed amount of time that's available. So it's got to come from somewhere. I'm hoping that once the podcast is sort of stabilized on its new rhythm and its new structure, that I'll be able to then find the time to commit to going back in. I mean, I still write, I still sing sort of, on my own, but I haven't sat down and said, okay, this is the next album I want to make, or this is the next tour I'm going to do. I have that material around and I'm always thinking about more of it, but there's a limited amount of energy that I can devote to that. So last year, I was much more invested in doing music things and the Italian tour and promoting my last album and doing all the press and stuff around that. So that was where a lot of my creative energy went. And this year, the podcast has got the front running seat because I'm trying to build it into something that it wasn't before. So sometimes I have to make trade-offs in terms of, I have this many numbers in a day, and this many hours in a day. So where am I going to invest those hours? Where do they need to go most urgently?
No, it makes a lot of sense. And then you sort of deep dive in and you really focus on that passion. But it also allows you then to sort of recharge the singing batteries while you're focusing on the podcast, and then vice versa. It kind of answers my sort of last question was going to be about how do you, like, what's next? Because now you're going to be a tango dancing superstar. You're going to be a podcasting legend. You're going to be a singing maestro. Are these just creative passions for you? Or are you wanting to do these full time, or like what do you want the evolution of your brand, I suppose? How do you want to take this? If you look back at this, would you think, yeah, I did a podcast, I did this, or do you want to think I gave it all? I left my job and I went full into the music, or have you thought that far ahead?
Yes. So I have a problem, which is that I really dislike being mediocre at anything. I really, really don't like, I'm not happy to be sort of okay at something. So if I'm going to do it, I really want to be good at it. And so if you combine that with the fact that I also have multiple things that I really want to do, it explains a lot about my schedule and what pulls me around. Right? I mean,
Yep.
it's not enough for me to be able to dance tango. For the last 3 weeks, I've been doing like a show tango seminar where we're leaping in the air and doing these like show moves that social dancers never do, only elite performers do. And yes, of course I want to do that, right? So obviously I'm there. So what's happening is I've kind of got this interesting moment where my regular college teaching job is about to disappear. And this is because our government has made some changes to do with international students. And so that's causing cutbacks across all higher education institutions across Canada, because international students have been a major part of the operating budget. And that has just disappeared. So everyone's got problems. I've been teaching at college for more than a decade, and that's sort of been my main gig in terms of paying the bills. But I'm fortunate in that I've had some warning with this. And so I've had to make a decision about, do I want to just, okay, find another career? Or do I want to take what I love and try to make that my full time? And I'm currently opting for that second option, which is, I mean, I wanted to get a PhD because I wanted to be paid to nerd out on reading scholarly stuff and write about it and talk about it. Like, that was my idea of a dream job. And for various reasons, I didn't go ahead with that, largely to do with the state of the industry and people leaving it to do real estate. I mean, there's a whole other conversation about how higher education is being restructured so that those jobs don't exist anymore.
That's why I left mine.
Right? It didn't end up making a lot of sense. So, but if I could make the podcast more of a full-time thing, where I'm spending most of my time getting up and doing the research and making these episodes, that is a dream job to me. And so that is actually my focus right now, is growing the podcast, and allowing that to be a major part of what I do, and hopefully make it the main thing that I do, financially speaking. So that's my focus for this year.
And why did you pick that particular title? Because I know we've talked about the podcast, but could you give a little synopsis and a bit behind the meaning of the title? Because I think it's a brilliant title. But when I said it to my mom, she was kind of like, "What? What was the I want to say the logic? What was the thinking behind calling it that? And how would you sell it to somebody who's looking for a new podcast to listen to?"
Okay, so those are two questions, and I'll take the title one
I'll
first.
wait for the first one. This is going to be brilliant.
Yeah. The meaning for that title comes more from the poet brain than the logic brain, and it has an alliterative
That's an
quality.
title for you.
It's alliterative quality. I mean, you have the double V, you have the double syllable, villains, virgins, right? But also it's evocative because it kind of gives you two extremes on the spectrum. A virgin is someone that we think of as very naive and very unknowing about a lot of things. And a villain, of course, is somebody who's very experienced and very nefarious in lots of ways. And so they're sort of opposites on the spectrum. And they are the sorts of types that show up in a lot of history stories. And so I wanted to gesture at the fact that this is going to be a history podcast about colorful characters. This is not going to be a period specific history, just the history of Western Europe or just the history of religion or whatever. This is going to be a history about, colorful characters and great stories. And that's what I wanted to gesture at with the title, but I wanted to make it kind of catchy and memorable. And so I was just sort of tossing things around, and it was the poet part of my brain that likes to put words together in interesting ways that went, villains and virgins. Yeah, that's got a good ring to it. I like the sound of that. And that makes sense. Boom. Let's do that. So that's how the title came across. How I would sell it to people would be, this is history as storytelling. It's history with a human face, and it's history with contemporary relevance. Because while I'm a nerd, a self-described, self-confessed history nerd, I deliberately focus my stories on themes and questions that I think are important and relevant to think about. So I'm not interested in counting the number of X's on a Frankish goldwork buckle because isn't it so interesting how Frankish goldwork from the 6th century was different from Frankish goldwork from the 9th century. There are people who do that, and that's great. That's not what I'm doing. So if I'm going to tell you about the Franks, it's because I think there's something important about them that we can understand or learn from in a human way. And that's what I'm going to bring out. So it's not historical detail for kind of arcane, obscure trivia purposes. It's history with an application. It's history that you can resonate with, and that's what it's about.
I love that because it's certainly something you do. You make history fun, exciting, but educational. You learn by the stories, the people, the how you make the story of it that come alive. That you make it like just not just educational, but exciting, fun. And it's something I even now, despite knowing tons of stuff about like a particular topic, for example, I'll listen and go, I didn't know that, that, need to look into that person. So no matter what stage you are at on the particular topic, you can get something from it. And I can't wait to see these amazing places you can go because there's a ton of history still to be covered. And you're doing a fantastic work. And when I left my educational job, it allowed me now to branch out into doing the podcast more. But I haven't made it full time yet. So I wish you nothing but success for the future to get to that point because I think you've got something. You've got this ability. Never mind just being an amazing singer, awesome person. I don't know what you're like at tango dancing, but I'm sure you're good at that. But you've got this ability to make podcasts exciting. Like you are the kind of person that's designed for podcasting and singing. What do you want? It feels like it's been 10 minutes, but it's been an hour 20. So apologies for using up so much of your time. But what do you want people to? I would love to do another round because there's so many things to come into. I think you're awesome. You're fun, exciting. You're full of energy. I'm so glad we made this connection. But what would you want people to take from this as a sort of first introduction to Eva the person, Eva the podcaster, Eva the singer, Eva the tango dancer, Eva the educational superstar? What would you want them to take from this?
I think that every person has their own creative or adventurous impulses. I think it's a human thing. I don't think it's some special gift that only a few of us are privileged to receive. I think that everyone has their own impulse and their own gifts, and they might be different. For example, I have a brother who's a genius at creating things out of metal, and it started when he was in high school, and he started making set suits of gladiator armor for his friends out of tar paper, and making them look really realistic, like gladiator style. And he even made a fire breathing gladiator helmet. And then he started making swords, and they started having like fights in this armor. It started as some goofy little thing that he just loved, and he gave it oxygen, and he allowed himself to be guided by that interest. And now the work that he does is stunning. I mean, he's made handcrafted jewelry for me out of gold and gems that is the envy of anyone who looks at it. He's made gold scale motorcycle bags that look like they came out of Jason and the Argonauts, but for a futuristic motorcycle gang. I mean, it's insane. And the abilities that he's developed are a direct result of him giving himself the permission to pursue that nerdy, quirky set of interests that he had as a teenager. Now, just because you didn't pursue your interests as a teenager doesn't mean that you don't have them. The thing is that people don't give themselves permission. And I was having this conversation with a friend of mine after tango the other day, because, here we are, a bunch of people who are, not kids necessarily anymore. And we're doing these insane tango moves. I mean, we're being lifted in the air, and we're flying across the room, and we're dancing on tables. I kid you not, there were tea tables involved, and we were on them. It was it was quite bizarre.
I'm assuming Stefan's not here at this point.
No. And so it was the thing I said to my friend was, I think that people get old when they lose the capacity to play, when they cease to give themselves permission to do that thing just because it gives them joy, just because it's a quirky thing that makes them smile and they want to do it. And to give yourself the permission to be silly and to play with something. And it's okay if you're not the best at it. and for some people it might be painting, and for some people it might be doing some crazy outdoor trip, or it might be, working with stuff to make jewelry or whatever it is. But if your life is just about getting up, going to that job you have to do to pay the bills, and then coming home to sort of recover from that by drinking and watching Netflix, that's no kind of a life, honestly. It's a very unsatisfying life. It's a life where you're sort of numbing the edge off an existence which largely you're not enjoying. And so what I would say to people is, give yourself the permission to do things just because they make you happy. And if there's that little creative urge or itch or whatever it is, join a club, do the craft, play with the paint, whatever it is that gives you joy, do that. Because what you find, even if you never become great at that thing, what you find in the action of doing that is presence. You become totally absorbed in doing just that thing for the moments you're focused on it. And that experience is calming. It drowns out the rest of the noise in your mind and from your life. It puts you back into touch with the center of who you are. And it's deeply nourishing in a way that I have a hard time putting into words. And I can tell you that when I go and dance tango for a couple of hours on a Tuesday night, I come in there with the weight of all the, things that are going on in my life. And I leave with a light step and joy in my heart. And I sleep with music in my mind. And, people will reach that state of presence and forgetting and joy through their own roots. But you have to find those things and you have to build them into your life. Otherwise, you're just surviving the rat race and then you die. So I'm saying that you need to find those things and you need to build them into your life, whatever they are, and give yourself permission to do them just because they make you happy.
I love that. That's a beautiful way of putting it, because it's true. You never know. You might be crap at it. You might just enjoy it. It might just be a hobby, but you never know where it's going to take you. I mean, I didn't think I'd ever be doing a podcast 200 odd episodes in, speaking to somebody like yourself, or interviewing a guy yesterday about how we're not dead yet and we need to take advantage of life and push and find, create the adventure within yourself, and interviewing a guy who travels the world over rapids and after they're getting married, and all these amazing people who I've interviewed over the show. And they all started that. They just let that creative itch get scratched, and before you know it, it completely transformed their life. I would love to have you on again. I think you're a sensation. You're going to be a superstar. For those people who want to follow along, find the podcast, find you on social media, find your website, come and watch you perform. How do we keep in touch? I was going to say, how can we stalk you? But that sounds wrong. How can we find the amazing work that you're doing?
Well, basically, if you look up my name, which is Eva Schubert, and that's SCHUBERT, then I'll show up everywhere. So the podcast is on all streaming platforms, and you find that under Villains and Virgins podcast. If you look up my name on Spotify or platforms, you'll discover Eva Schubert, the singer. But if you want the podcast, you should look for Villains and Virgins. On YouTube, you could search for either of those two handles, because the podcast exists in video version on YouTube. So if you prefer kind of watching something as opposed to just listening to it on headphones, then that's also available. And I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook and all those other things under Eva Schubert. So I kind of put different pieces more or less on different platforms. So you get a different sort of set of things depending on which one you follow. But you can keep up with the larger picture on any of these, really.
Well, that's it for another week, and thank you for listening. It's now time to take what you've learned and use it to develop and enhance your life with the key points mentioned. Listen, try it, embrace it, use it, and crush it. Now's your time to hit that next level in your life. If you liked this episode, then please leave a comment on the show notes or a review of the show on your podcast platform. Everything helps evolve the show. Until next week, keep seeking the next level in your life.